The year is 1962. Montgomery, Alabama. A black woman named Georgia Gilmore stands in her kitchen. She's frying chicken, making pies. But she's not just cooking, she's funding a revolution. Every piece of fried chicken she sells under the counter, every slice of sweet potato pie, the money goes straight to the Montgomery bus boycott. Her food is literally fueling the civil rights movement. But open any cookbook from that time talking about Southern hospitality, and you won't find her name. Her recipes, absorbed into the culture. Her contribution, erased. Her genius, served up as just another American tradition. They stole our recipes. Then they pretended we didn't exist. This isn't just about food. It's about the systematic theft of black creativity, the erasure of our labor, and the rewriting of history on a plate. The entire foundation of what the world calls Southern cooking was built in black kitchens. But the architects? They were scrubbed from the blueprint. Today, you're going to see the direct line from plantation kitchens to white-owned restaurants that got famous for inventing dishes we created. You'll understand the four-step playbook of culinary theft, and you'll meet the people fighting to put our names back on the menu. To understand the theft, you first need to understand what was stolen. And that story? It doesn't start on a plantation. It starts in West Africa. Centuries before enslavement, there were sophisticated food cultures, jollof rice, complex stews, techniques for smoking fish, deep knowledge of seasoning with native spices. These weren't just recipes. This was science. This was art. This was generations of knowledge passed down through families. Then came the Middle Passage. Enslaved Africans were stripped of everything: their names, their families, their freedom. But there's one thing they couldn't take: their knowledge. The memory of those flavors lived in their minds. When they arrived on American soil, they were given literal scraps, the parts of the animal enslavers wouldn't touch: chitterlings, hog jowls, pig feet. They got the greens thrown away from the fields. And this is where the real magic happened. This wasn't just making do, this was alchemy. They took those scraps and applied African cooking methods. They simmered greens for hours, the same way they'd cooked leafy vegetables back home. They took the okra they'd smuggled over and used it to thicken soups, creating what we now call gumbo. They used rice cultivation skills from Senegal to dominate the rice plantations of the Carolinas. Skills so valuable that enslavers literally kidnapped people specifically for their agricultural knowledge. The barbecue pit? That technique has roots in indigenous American slow cooking methods that black cooks observed, adapted, and perfected. The entire culinary landscape of the South is a fusion: West African knowledge, Native American ingredients, European techniques, all filtered through the brutal creativity of enslaved cooks. These black cooks, mostly unnamed women, were the original chefs of the South. They cooked in the big house for white families. Their skill was so essential it became a point of pride for slave owners. They created the flavors that defined Southern aristocracy, but their names were never written down in those family recipe books. Their contributions were treated like water from a well, something to be used but never credited. So how does a recipe get stolen? It's not usually one big heist. It's a system, a pattern that's been repeated for centuries. Let me break down the 4 steps. First, there's proximity and observation. The white family lives right next to the black cook. They taste the food every single day. They see the techniques. They smell the spices. The recipe exists in the black kitchen, but it's consumed in the white dining room. And here's the key: they don't see it as intellectual property. They see it as a service they paid for, a product they own. Second, they adopt and sanitize. The white family adopts the dish. But to make it acceptable for their social circles, they sanitize it. They remove the unpleasant parts, the offal, the strong spices, the intense flavors born from necessity. They tame it. They give it a new, more genteel name. What was once chitlins becomes savory sausage. The edges get smoothed off. The pain gets removed. Third, and this is the most important step, dissemination without attribution. This is where the erasure becomes official. The white woman shares the recipe with her friends. She might even publish it in a community cookbook. But when she writes it down, she calls it her own family secret. Or worse, just a traditional Southern recipe with no origin story. This happened constantly. Dishes with clear African origins were published as the inventions of white women. The recipe enters the mainstream completely detached from its black creator. And finally, commercialization and celebrity. This is the modern version. A white chef with resources and connections eats at a small black-owned restaurant. They taste something brilliant. They go back to their own kitchen, replicate it with minor tweaks, and put it on their menu. Food media, dominated by white critics, praises the chef for their innovation. The chef gets a TV show, a cookbook deal. They're hailed as a genius. Meanwhile, the black restaurateur who created the concept, they're struggling to keep the doors open. The cycle is complete. Extraction, erasure, enrichment. This whole mechanism relies on a power imbalance. Black cooks historically lacked access to publishing, to media, to money. So their creations could be taken because there was no system to protect them. Their recipes were treated as folklore, not as the valuable intellectual property they actually were. And this system didn't die with Jim Crow. It just evolved. It's why you still see white chefs being celebrated for elevating dishes that have been staples in black communities for generations. The playbook is the same, only the players have changed. But this isn't just history. This is happening right now. To see how the four-step playbook works today, we need to look at soul food itself. The very term soul food was coined in the 1960s by black activists as a point of pride. It was a way to reclaim the cuisine of our ancestors, to celebrate the creativity that turned survival into art. But almost immediately, white food writers saw an opportunity. They saw a trend they could sell. So they entered phase 3, dissemination without attribution. They started writing articles and cookbooks about the new soul food. But they scrubbed the politics out. They presented it as fun, exotic cuisine, not as a testament to black survival. They focused on the comfort food angle while ignoring the painful history baked into every dish. Then came commercialization. This is where you see white chefs opening soul food restaurants in trendy neighborhoods. They market it as elevated Southern cuisine. But what does elevated really mean? It often means making the food more palatable to white, wealthy customers. It means removing the fat, toning down the seasoning, swapping out the offal for prime cuts. They're literally laundering the food, stripping it of its character and its history, taking out the soul from soul food. And the media celebrates them for it. A white chef gets a James Beard Award for reinterpreting gumbo. Meanwhile, the black grandmothers in Louisiana who've been making that gumbo for generations, completely invisible in the food media landscape. But here's the most messed up part. When black people cook this food, it's sometimes called unhealthy or low class. But when a white chef serves a cleaned-up version of the same dish, it's suddenly artisanal and innovative. They profit from our culture while reinforcing the idea that we need them to fix it. Let me give you a specific example. Barbecue. The entire culture of American barbecue, from Texas to the Carolinas, was developed and perfected by black pitmasters. Enslaved Africans were the ones tending fires for days. They understood the smoke and the meat. But open a mainstream food magazine's BBQ issue. Who are the experts they feature? It's overwhelmingly white men. The black pitmasters, who are the true custodians of the tradition, they're a footnote if they're mentioned at all. The story gets rewritten. Barbecue becomes about cowboys and Southern gentlemen. The black labor and genius that built it, completely erased. Or take shrimp and grits. This is a classic of the Gullah Geechee culture on the South Carolina coast. For generations, it was a humble, beloved dish in black communities. Simple, perfect, made with local shrimp and ground corn. Then in the 1980s, a white chef in Charleston put shrimp and grits on his upscale menu. He was hailed as a visionary for discovering this low-country classic. The dish exploded across the country, but the narrative almost always credits white chefs for its rise. The Gullah Geechee people, the actual creators, were pushed to the side in the story of their own food. This is the high-profile erasure. It's not just a recipe being copied. It's the entire story being stolen. The originators get pushed out while the imitators take a bow. And this has real consequences. When a white chef becomes the face of a cuisine, they get the investors, the media coverage, the awards. They build empires. Meanwhile, black chefs and restaurateurs fight for access to capital and fair reviews. They battle uphill while watching others profit from their stories. The psychological impact cuts just as deep. When you grow up seeing your culture celebrated on everyone's plate but your own people are invisible, it tells you something. It says your history isn't valuable unless it's filtered through a white lens. It's a quiet, constant message that your contributions don't truly belong to you. They stole our recipes. And then they had the nerve to tell us we never owned them in the first place. Have you seen this in your community? Drop a comment below. This erasure creates a war between two things, profit and preservation. On one side, you have the commercial food industry, and they have a financial reason to whitewash these dishes. Why? Because sanitized history sells better. A story about a white chef's innovation is more marketable to mainstream audiences than a complex story about black survival. It's easier to package, easier to sell. So the rough edges get smoothed. The challenging history gets glossed over. The food gets divorced from its meaning and repackaged as simple, delicious comfort food. This is the whitewashing effect. They take a dish steeped in meaning and turn it into a product. They extract the flavor and throw away the soul. And the profit margins? Huge. Think about the entire Southern food boom over the last 20 years. How many white-owned restaurant groups have built empires on black culinary tradition? They market authentic Southern hospitality while erasing who actually provided that hospitality for centuries. They sell nostalgia for a past that never existed, a past where the labor was invisible and the pain was absent. Meanwhile, the black communities that preserved these recipes see little of that money. The benefits flow to the appropriators. This isn't an accident, it's by design. The systems of funding, publishing, and media coverage are built to favor those who already have access. A black chef trying to open a restaurant that tells the true unfiltered story? They face an uphill battle for loans and press. A white chef opening an elevated version of the same thing? Featured in magazines, showered with investment. This creates a cycle. The whitewashed version becomes the dominant story in people's minds. It becomes the standard. Then when a black chef cooks the authentic historical versions, they're sometimes criticized for being too greasy, too salty, unrefined. Their food gets judged against the sanitized imitation. The authentic becomes the deviation. The copy becomes the original. But this is about more than money. It's about cultural integrity. When a recipe is whitewashed, it loses its connection to the people who created it. It becomes a hollow shell. The techniques that were born from necessity, like slow cooking tough cuts of meat, they get presented as just stylistic choices. The symbolism gets stripped away. The fight isn't just about getting a slice of the profit, it's about reclaiming the narrative. It's about insisting that the food can't be separated from the people who made it. Because every time a pot of greens is cooked the traditional way, it's an act of resistance. It's a declaration. We are still here, and our stories are still simmering. So if the theft is this obvious, why can't we just sue? Why isn't there legal protection for the grandmothers whose life's work has been stolen? The answer? Our intellectual property system is almost perfectly designed to fail black food creators. Copyright law protects artistic expression, but it doesn't cover recipes. You can copyright the text and photos in a cookbook, but not the list of ingredients or instructions. A recipe is considered a functional idea, not creative work. This is the first and biggest blind spot. It means anyone can legally take your family's recipe, write it in their own words, and publish it as theirs. The law sees no theft in that. Trademark law protects names and logos, not dishes. You can trademark a restaurant name, but you can't trademark gumbo or jollof rice. Those are considered generic terms. So white-owned businesses use terms like soul food freely, even when their connection to the culture is weak at best. Patent law, even more useless. To patent something, it has to be novel, non-obvious, and useful. A centuries-old cooking technique fails the novel test immediately. The very fact that a recipe has been passed down through generations is the reason it can't be protected. This creates a devastating trap. Our greatest contributions are our enduring traditions, recipes refined over hundreds of years. But the legal system only protects what's new and individual. It recognizes the lone inventor, not the collective wisdom of a community. It has no framework for protecting cultural heritage. Our food gets treated as folklore, and folklore has no owner in the eyes of the law. This legal vacuum is where theft thrives. It allows corporations to take traditional knowledge, package it, and sell it back to the communities that created it. It's why you find authentic soul food seasoning in supermarkets owned by companies with no ties to the Black community. But the problem goes deeper than the letter of the law. Even if a legal theory existed, who has resources for a years-long court battle? Not the individual cook or small family restaurant. The system favors the large, well-funded entities doing the appropriating. They have teams of lawyers. The originators have maybe a prayer and a family cookbook. This legal failure is a form of violence. It codes the erasure into the structure of society. It tells us our cultural products are free for the taking, that our heritage isn't ours to control. It says Black creativity is a natural resource to be mined, not intellectual property to be respected. The law, in its supposed neutrality, sides with the powerful by default. It protects the brand, not the culture. It secures the profit, but not the people. And until we rethink what intellectual property means in a cultural context, this theft will continue to be perfectly legal. And the pretense that we didn't exist? That will remain the status quo. What do you think should change? Comment below. But here's the thing about truth. They can try to erase us, but they can't erase the truth. And a powerful movement is rising, led by chefs, historians, and everyday people who are done asking for a seat at the table. They're building their own. This is the reclamation. It's happening in restaurants where menus explicitly credit the Black cooks and communities that inspired the dishes. It's happening in the work of culinary historians like Michael Twitty, who uses DNA testing and historical documents to trace cooking traditions back to their specific African origins. He doesn't just talk about food. He wears the clothing of an enslaved cook and cooks over open fires, forcing people to see the Black hands that were always there. This reclamation is also economic. Black food entrepreneurs are creating their own distribution networks, their own food festivals, their own media platforms. They're bypassing the traditional gatekeepers who have historically profited from their exclusion. They're using social media to tell their own stories directly to the public, reclaiming the narrative one post, one recipe video at a time. It's a defiant act. Every time a Black chef sources from a Black farmer or highlights the Gullah Geechee history of a dish on their menu, they are punching a hole in the wall of erasure. They are saying, "We are here. We always have been. And you will know our names."